Hello and welcome to Create Context Weekly Movie Minute. My name is Joe, and every week we take a look at, one of the bigger releases that are coming out. This week we are talking about the movie Hard Eyes. Hard Eyes slashes into theaters just in time for Valentine's Day. This film from Josh Rubin leans hard into romantic comedy, but it may be a little too sincere for its own good. While there is some fun to be had with the gnarly kills and over the top violence, Hard Eyes ultimately fails to make a lasting impression. Blending horror and comedy is a tough tightrope to balance, but the team behind Hard Eyes, including screenwriters from Freaky and Happy Death Day, seem to be up to the challenge. Unfortunately, this film spends too much time focusing on rom-com tropes and ignoring the slasher staples. Hard Eyes begins with a gloriously gruesome opening akin to what we've come to expect from the Scream franchise. This film aims squarely at romantic comedies, making its first two victims the most unlikable Instagram couple on the planet. The guy is just a total cuck, and the chick is wearing those big stupid hats. The titular killer stalks and kills these two during a cheesy, over-the-top proposal set to bad country love songs. It all works surprisingly well and sets up a great premise for a movie. A killer known for murdering couples on Valentine's Day, is back for the third year in a row, and couples everywhere should be terrified. Instead, the film switches gears and becomes a pretty boring rom-com for the rest of the first act. Disney Channel star Olivia Holt leads the cast as Allie, the about-to-lose-her-job, loveless rom-com lead stereotype. She has a purposely eye-roll inducing meet-cute with Jay, played by Scream star Mason Gooding. The comedy in their meet-cute and Allie's introduction is painfully hit or miss. There's a truly funny moment at the beginning of the film where the jewelry company Allie works for shows everyone her latest TV ad, the ad that Allie made herself. The ad is this overly soapy drama commercial focusing on famous celebrity deaths, real and fictional in media. So they show Bonnie and Clyde dying. They show Jack and Rose from the Titanic dying, obviously Romeo and Juliet. It's actually shot very cool, but the internet hates the commercial and find it in bad taste with a serial killer running around killing couples on Valentine's Day. Allie and her company are lambasted on the internet for this ad, turning it into this vague statement on internet outrage culture. This is a theme that's going to come up again towards the end of the film. This scene and theme work well, but everything else falls flat on its face. The chemistry between the two leads is almost non-existent, and the film is trying way too hard to parody romantic comedies without making it into a full-on spoof akin to Scary Movie. This result is a first act that feels less satire and more homage. Very few of the jokes actually land, and the ones that do aren't enough to make us forget that there's a killer that we came to the theater to see. Once the killer finally reemerges, the film thankfully gets back some of its steam. The two were chased out of Allie's apartment before ending up in a police station, a drive-in theater, and finally a church for the final showdown. These set pieces are fine for the most part, but the whole movie is bathed in these deep, cool tones. The entire film, it's so blue that it looks like these actors are underwater, like it's James Cameron's next Avatar movie. Hard Eyes has a few memorable kills, but nothing we haven't seen before. The film is too mild in its kills to compete with Damon Leone's Terrifier franchise. It's too boring with its execution to compete with the Scream franchise. And it's too sincere in its romantic comedy tropes to be seen as an actual spoof. Instead, the driving narrative feels more akin to an actual rom-com with occasional gore splatters. Unfortunately, neither of those work very well. This may have been the writer's goal to make a romantic comedy that just happens to have a killer, but the romance is boring, none of the jokes land, and that loses everything that should make this good slasher film feel fun. Instead, it just drags. Typical slasher movies tend to introduce a cast of characters and then slowly kill off each person until only a final girl remains. That concept is tried and true and has worked well for decades. It's also an idea that would have worked perfectly with the premise of Hard Eyes. Just imagine a night out with 4 or 5 couples on Valentine's Day where they slowly keep getting killed in more and more gruesome fashion. That would have been a blast. Instead, this movie really just has the two leads. There are some side characters that show up here and there, but none of them are fully fleshed out. They barely get any screen time, and we're just following these two actors with little to no chemistry. And the two actors we're following are wearing so much plot armor that there's absolutely no tension in the horror of the film. Holt and Gooding are doing a fine enough job with their roles when they have something to do, but so much of their on screen time is spent in this boring romantic will they, won't they, or it's them fighting off a killer, again, with too much plot armor to make it tense at all. The movie reveals the true identity of the Hard Eyes killer, but it's such a bonkers reveal at the end, and it just shows a character that we know nothing about and care nothing about. There are a few red herrings early on about who the killer could be, but none of those go anywhere. They're never explained, they just kind of happen. And the final reveal of who the Hard Eyes killer actually is so out of left field that it feels like there must have been some character development, some arcs that were left on this cutting room floor. Look, I love horror movies in all shapes and sizes. I love the great horror movies, the Hereditaries, or the Exorcist, with these deep, rich, interesting themes that uses the medium of horror to fully realize those themes. I also love the campy horror flicks, the one that lean into the ridiculousness of horror and plays it up for laughs and fun. I even like the gruesome horror flicks, the Saws, the Final Destinations, the movie that keeps audiences guessing about how gnarly is the next kill gonna be. Hard Eyes tries to be a little bit of everything. There's a little bit of camp, almost, a small amount of social commentary, maybe, and some actual overtly gory kills. But by trying to be everything, this film fails to have a unique identity and deliver something memorable. It's serviceable for a 97-minute movie, but it doesn't do any of these genres particularly well enough to be remembered. Hard Eyes may resonate with the perpetually lovesick, but for everyone else, there are better horror offerings. In theaters right now, go see Companion. It's great. If you liked Hard Eyes, or maybe you're looking for something a little bit different, first, I have to recommend Scream, the first one from 1996. Scream is the first film to really turn the slasher genre on its ear and make slasher movies into this self-referential piece of art. Up to this point, the slasher genre had grown incredibly stale, with killers like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger starring in dozens of sequels that did little for their franchise or the genre as a whole. Jason, for example, he killed teens at a camp for 7 movies straight. I guess 6 because he wasn't technically the killer of the first one, but still, 7 movies that all more or less had the same plot. Teenagers show up at a camp, then Jason comes in, then they all die. That happened over and over again. Even when they finally tried to mix it up, their grand idea was to put Jason in Manhattan. That movie was so bad that Paramount abandoned the entire franchise and gave it to New Line. Scream took the ideas and themes of a slasher movie and had fun with it. It took all of the tropes, all the cut and paste characters, and put them into an interesting narrative that both poked fun at the genre while paying homage to it. Scream would in turn go on to spawn several sequels of varying quality, but the first will always remain a classic in horror cinema. Next, I check out In a Violent Nature from last year. This was a Shudder original film and is still available on the service. In a Violent Nature is a slasher film, but one that follows the killer. He's the main character, and the majority of the movie is seen through his perspective rather than the perspective of his teenage victims. It is a really cool concept and one that actually brings a sense of fear back to a genre that lost it long ago. The genre, the slasher genre, has had to lean harder and harder into camp to make the series work. In a Violent Nature brings it back and makes a truly terrifying film. It also has some of the most gruesome kills ever put on screen that aren't done by an evil clown named Art. Lastly, a twofer. I check out The Wedding Singer and Yule Log 2. Both of these movies are kind of spoofs, with The Wedding Singer maybe being a little closer to satire, but these movies pull off what Hard Eyes isn't really able to. They poke fun as genre flicks while still making a pretty entertaining genre flick. The Wedding Singer is one of Adam Sandler's earlier works. I find it very underrating. It's him and Drew Barrymore. I think most people know about it, but Yule Log 2 might be one people don't know about. Yule Log 2 is a sequel to Yule Log, which is a movie that came out on Adult Swim about 2 years ago. It's available on Max. And the idea for Yule Log is it's a Christmas Yule log burning in a fireplace, right? So the first movie started was just a static 2 to 3 minutes, I think, of the Yule log burning. While you're watching that static, the camera moved out a little bit. And then for the first half of that movie, it was just a one camera setup, watching all these people interact around it. And then it just got crazier and crazier, stranger and stranger, and turned into a really great horror flick. The sequel, Yule Log 2, does something a little different. While I really liked Yule Log 1, I actually think it is a much better film than Yule Log 2. What Yule Log 2 does is makes this really interesting mix between a Hallmark movie and a horror movie. Even like the aspect ratio changes. So half of the movie is set in this like Hallmark Christmas town. They're throwing out all these spoofs, and then occasionally the aspect ratio will change. It'll go to a wider screen format, and we'll go back to the horror elements of a Christmas Yule log that's chasing people around. It's a really interesting movie. It's something that does this concept in more of a spoof manner than Hard Eyes, but it does it in a manner that I find works a lot better than this movie did. Thank you guys so much for hanging out and checking out Create Context Weekly Movie Minute. We are brought to you by CreateContext.com. You can head over there for more film reviews and analysis. We'll be back next week with a review of Captain America. I don't know what this one's called, whatever the new one is that's got Harrison Ford as the president. We're going to watch that. We're going to review it. So if you want to check that out, please give us a subscribe. That would be super cool. And I'll see you guys next time.